Well, welcome back to the Anti-War Room. Tom Andrews here from One Without War with Darcy Scott Martin from True Majority and John Issacs, still with Council for Livable World. And, it's been a wild week this past week. The House finally passed the supplemental. And first of all, let's talk a little bit about that. What did you all think about the vote, about the outcome, and about the coverage of this vote?
Well, certainly the vote was coming down to the wire, but was fairly orchestrated. Certainly when it gets brought to the floor, it's because there's a strong sense that there are enough votes there. And there were a lot of good speeches on all sides, I thought. Certainly there were folks who spoke from their heart about why they disagreed with the legislation, why they agreed with the legislation, why they didn't agree with the legislation, but were voting for it for an outcome they'd like to see happen. In the final analysis, when 218 votes were counted, they immediately closed off the voting. Mel Watt came running in and had to give a speech afterwards explaining that he just hadn't made it and he intended to vote yes, but they got to their magic number, and that's what mattered. There were two Republicans who voted against it, Mr. Gilchrist and Mr. Jones.
Voted for the legislation.
Oh, I'm sorry, voted yes for the legislation because they felt and have worked consistently for, no, they voted no. No, they voted yes.
They voted yes. All the other Republicans voted no. They voted yes. But who's counting?
Oh, my mind is spinning. It was quite a day because they have worked consistently to see an end to the war, and that's something that they saw this bill would have.
Right. That's right.
14 Democrats voted the opposite way, and Mr. Stark from California voted present as his vote to object. The mixture of folks who voted no on the war supplemental were Blue Dog Democrats as well as some progressive Democrats who felt that they could never vote for funding for the war.
Right. And it's very interesting when you're in a situation in the House or the Senate in which you have to vote for something that you're really against, but it gets you to the place where you ultimately want to be for. It's a very tricky situation, and very often, and I've seen this happen, in my own experience, is that leadership will strike a deal at the very end with you. As one of these members, and they'll say, look, can you at least hold off voting until the very end? And if we absolutely need you, and only if we need you, would you go for it? So that some members will agree to that on that condition. They're hoping and praying that it's going to end up that they don't have to cast that vote, but they're kind of like in the back pocket just in case that happens. One way or the other, they got the 218 votes. And the headline, of course, the next day was the House votes for a time certain for the president to get troops out of Iraq.
Yeah, certainly a lot of progressives felt very strongly that they didn't want to support another $100 billion for the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. And that was a going-in position, but the House leadership worked very hard to win votes, arguing, as you say, it's the best they could do. It would produce good headlines the next day that the House was voting for end the war legislation, and then there'll be other votes later on other bills later in the year. So ultimately, the last thing that the leadership argued was if this bill goes down, if the supplemental appropriations is defeated, it'll be a disaster for the Democrats who just took control in January. And those arguments ultimately prevailed with enough progressives. As Darcy pointed out, in the end, about 7 progressives and 7 Blue Dog Democrats voted against the bill on final passage.
Okay, so now the appropriations bill is before that is the supplemental appropriations is before the Senate. That happens this week. John, what do we see? What will happen on the Senate floor with respect to the supplemental?
On Thursday last week, the Senate Appropriations Committee approved the supplemental appropriations and included language devised by Majority Leader Harry Reid of Nevada, saying the troops would have to begin to be withdrawn from Iraq within 4 months of enactment of the bill, and a goal, not a mandate, but a goal for the troops to be out by March 2008.
So a mandate that they must start with a goal as to when they should finish.
Correct. Right. And that was adopted basically by voice vote. The vote to challenge that will happen on the Senate floor. The Republican opponents of that measure, including Senator Thad Cochran, the ranking Republican, said, we won't challenge this in committee, we'll wait until we get to the Senate floor. Sometime this week, the Republicans will move, along with Joe Lieberman of Connecticut, will move to strike that Reid language.
Okay, and what do we expect? Is there going to be a knockdown, drag-out battle over that vote, that proposed
yes,
amendment?
In fact, this will be the second time that the Senate will have voted on that same language. Senator Reid put forward his language, I think it was March 15th. He lost 48 to 50 a very close vote. So it's again going to be a close vote with a few senators' votes uncertain, including people like Sununu of New Hampshire and Coleman of Minnesota and Smith of Oregon.
Do you think Mr. Johnson will make it in from rehab just for that vote?
No. And then a couple of Democrats like Pryor of Arkansas and Ben Nelson of Nebraska. So it'll be another close vote, unpredictable. Republicans think they can knock out the language, but it's a 50-50 proposition.
And interestingly enough, up in Maine, I know a little bit about Maine, Congressman Tom Allen is holding a news conference on Monday morning, along with General Robert Gard, a retired three-star Army general, calling upon Maine's two senators, Olympia Snowe and Susan Collins, to do the right thing. So could be a very, very tight vote. Are we seeing over in the Senate any of the opposition from the progressive side that we saw over in the House? Will that be an issue this round?
No, Senator Reid managed to unite virtually all of the Democrats in the Democratic caucus, from Feingold and Boxer and Harkin on the left, and Kerry to all the rest of the Democrats, including Nelson of Florida, for example, saying, yes, we'll go for this bill. So that there is a strong unity, except for about 2 or 3 Democrats, in favor of the Reid language and in favor of the appropriations bill.
Okay, so just
a very different level of finesse I wanted to mention specifically on the Senate bill as it contrasts to the House bill. The House bill that came to the floor ended up being unamendable, and so kind of those last items that people thought that they might get a chance to vote on to move it in a more progressive direction, or at least get to lay down a marker about their views, were not available. The Senate's bill has always been positioned as and projected as moving to being a stronger and stronger bill, instead of these are all the things we really want, and then we're weakening it and weakening it. So when you start out with the Senate bill, and then Mr. Reid says, I'm going to add these good things, and then there's talk about Jim Webb's amendment, whether it'll be offered about strengthening wording on Iran. It's all looking like it's moving to be stronger, not being weakened, which I think actually is a great strategic position to be in terms of wanting people to support it.
And that Senator Webb amendment would be to prohibit a military strike on Iran unless given explicit approval by the Congress. So it had to be authorized. Mm-hmm. And that, of course, was in the original House bill, right. But that was struck as a way of getting this compromise. Okay, so that happens this week. And then there is a recess following the Easter recess. The House is out for 2 weeks. The Senate is out for 1 week. Who knows why that is? Maybe after the bruising battle of last week, we need a little bit more rest and rehabilitation if you're in the House side. And then, just looking ahead, if we can for just a minute, then there is a conference committee where the Senate and the House will come together and try to carve out some kind of a compromise between the two, and then that comes to the floor. So the supplemental is still going to see yet another vote in the House, based upon what comes out of the conference committee. And the conference committee is simply members of the House, members of the Senate get together and try to work something out. And then the Senate, in turn, will do this. When is this all over? I mean, assume we have 2 weeks vacation. We've got, in 3 weeks, we've got the conference committee coming together. And then, so we're talking about third week in April, John?
Third week or fourth week in April. Before the end of April, we expect to have final votes in the House and Senate. Then it goes up to the President. I'd also point out that after the Friday vote, President Bush issued a very strong statement saying if the bill comes to his desk, is passed by the House, he's going to veto it. So
there's a veto, and then there's the issue of overriding the veto, and then that could get us all back to square one. So we have not seen the last of the supplemental, folks, and just when you thought it was safe to go into the Congress on this type of an issue, we have the authorization, the defense authorization bill in the House, and then the Senate coming right on the heels of the supplemental, and then on the heels of that, we have the appropriations vote based upon that authorization following that. So there's lots and lots of action coming up. And I guess the bottom line is that no matter where you sit on any of these particular measures, it's very important to be communicating to members of Congress, particularly as they prepare to go home and they get into these districts all across the country, to let them know that you're watching and that you want them to vote to get us out of Iraq just as soon as humanly possible.
And if I can add one other point, we had major disagreements on the supplemental bill in the House. Some people in the progressive community be for it, some against, but we have to work together from here on the larger goal of getting the U.S. out of Iraq. So the disagreements should be put aside and see if we can work together as much as we can on future legislation and votes.
Well, I think that's right. And clearly, I think we've all discussed this. The three of us have discussed this. This was a tactical, strategic debate. It was about the best tactics in the Congress as opposed to a difference of goal or a difference of principle. And so hopefully there'll be lots of opportunities for us to come together and row in the same direction on all of these strategies and tactics. But we will see. Listen, thank you very much for joining us at the Anti-War Room. Thank you, John. Thank you, Darcy. We'll be back in a few days, probably the beginning of next week, to talk about the Senate vote and what that portends as people in Congress, House and Senate, go home for their break and they get to hear from us. Thanks very much.